Recent data has shown that a 3-day weekend may in fact become a reality. Following international trials, an official pilot scheme of a 4-day work week has been running in South Africa since June and is expected to end in November. Let's chat now to a senior associate in employment law practice from Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr to unpack the legal ramifications of this move. Should South Africa in fact adopt this model? Leila, thank you so much for making time for us. What would be the broad implications of this 4-day work week on employment legislation?
Thanks very much for having me, Clement. So I think the starting point really is to understand, what the idea is with the 4-day work week. And here we do look to international trials that have happened, and as well the one that is now being undertaken in South Africa, as you've said. There was one actually that ran from March to September, and then another one that started in June. And what the idea is that we have 100% of the pay, 80% of the time, and then 100% of the productivity. So we're getting the same amount of money, we're pushing out the same deliverables, but we're spending 80% of the time in the workplace. And already listening to that and looking at where we are in South Africa and what our workforce looks like, we can already think about the fact that, there's going to be a difference when you're looking at people who work in office environments Monday to Friday, and perhaps a large portion of our workforce which are in other kinds of sectors, for example, manufacturing, mining, and things that work on a 24-hour operations basis. So for a lot of our employees who earn below, for example, the earnings threshold, and for other reasons, there are limits on, the number of hours that people may work in a week. And those things are highly regulated, and to a large degree highly regulated within the collective bargaining space. So already looking at that, there are a number of things from an employment perspective and from a legislative perspective that we need to consider if a 4-day work week were to be suggested or implemented.
Mm-hmm. What are the legal implications of decreased working hours on the employees themselves?
Yeah, so I think if we take the example of the Monday-Friday, right? So a Monday to Friday work week in an office, you work from 9 to 5, and now we're making that into a 4-day work week where let's say you're getting your Friday off, right? The idea is that you're in office for the same number of hours and you're just getting your Friday off, but you've got to deliver the same amount of work in the week. But now, and the idea is you're still delivering the same amount of work, so you get the same amount of pay, right? But now we take that and we implement it with shift systems, and people who work, for example, let's take a mine, and you've got a shift Monday to Friday, you do the 9 to 5 shift. Now suddenly you are working Monday to Thursday, the 9 to 5 shift, because remember the idea is you need to work fewer hours. And now you're actually working your Monday to Thursday. What's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence there is you're not getting paid for that Friday, right? And the consequence there is that your employer's got to find somebody else to fill that Friday shift. So I think the difference is, in the nature of the sector, that where we have to consider, well, who are working these shifts? Because the idea is that people actually need to be present and tendering their services in a shift-based system, which is different to, deliver X, Y, and Z, perhaps within an office context.
Okay. I imagine there are also going to be some issues between the trade unions and the private sector, should this, of course, take off?
Yeah, so I think as I've mentioned, within South African legislative context, we have high rates of collective bargaining. And this is really important to ensure, that there is bargaining power, that we are having these active conversations. And our sectors are highly regulated because of this, and we already have existing collective bargaining agreements in place. So should we want to change things like this? Should there be conversations around, are we potentially going to have people only working shifts from Monday to Thursday? This is going to require negotiation. This is going to require interaction with trade unions, with interested parties. And that's going to be an extended process. And we really have to think about what the implications of those are. And like I said, it extends, from number of hours to actually rates of pay and what people are taking home, and the number of employees potentially that you're going to actually have within your workplace, now maybe adding an additional shift.
Yeah, and I imagine there is also a process of law reform that this shift would necessitate, right, in order to protect worker rights and also just regulate the industries.
Yeah, so again, because we're so highly regulated, what we've got in place in a lot of our industries, we've mentioned manufacturing, we've spoken about mining, etc. The legislation that we've got in place, the collective agreements that we've got in place, those things would have to be reconsidered if we were going to ensure that, people who are working a maximum number of hours within a week are going to be adequately protected in the same way. And then what happens to their rates of pay? What happens to existing wage agreements? What happens to take-home pay? So there's going to be, requirements around how viable is this? And if it is viable, or what determines the viability, is the number of changes that we're going to actually have to make to ensure that it works within the spaces and within our sectors that exist in South Africa.
Yeah. And then you also have these specific industries, such as manufacturing, and it's just that, not just manufacturing, but mining as well, which operate for up to 24 hours a day. How would they be affected?
Yeah, so it's exactly that, right? It's looking at the fact that continuous operations, we take a mine, mine's a great example where we actually need to make sure that our operations are running on a 24-hour basis. And that means that we actually need shifts that are going to cover that entire 24-hour period. And in the event that we now have people on this suggested model that we've seen internationally working fewer hours, and where they're getting paid, remember, on an hourly basis, it's going to mean now that you've now got to add an additional shift of people in, because now suddenly your person who worked Monday to Friday, they're only working Monday to Thursday. So you've got to get in additional employees, and you've got to make sure now from an employer's perspective that you've got additional shifts. You've got to get additional people in to cover that shift. I'll use the example of, we having this conversation on a Saturday. If it were to be implemented in my workplace, would you have to get somebody else to come and do this to cover the conversation? And how would that impact then, my employment relationship, for example? So I think in the shift-based system, that would have those kinds of implications, because if you're going to limit that, you're going to have to think about, well, who works the other shift? And what does that mean for our employment relationship? What does that mean for our workforce? What does that mean for people's remuneration? What does it mean for their benefits? And if they're being paid per hour and they're getting remunerated less, well, then we're really not getting that 100% of the pay for 80% of the time that we've seen in international spaces.
Yeah. So from the trials that have already been conducted abroad, there are a number of countries that have already gone through these trials. What have you picked up? What's been the response when this has been conducted?
So very interesting. So I've actually looked at a study that was done in the UK, similar to the trial that's being done in South Africa from March of this year. And as you've mentioned, the second phase in June. And what they've actually found out is, after the trial has been conducted, what people have reported back who participated in the trial was that where, for example, they predicted or anticipated or would have wanted people to work 32 hours less, for example, within a week, you've actually got people who are now reducing their work rate by a significantly smaller portion of hours. So what's actually happening is, we're trying to work Monday, Thursday. We're trying to still keep our 9 to 5. We're trying to be productive within that space, or more productive in that space. So getting more out of the time that we're spending in the office or at work or tendering our services. But actually, we're ending up on those days working longer hours than we typically would have worked on those days. And then when we tally that up, how much more of a difference does it really make? And the percentage difference there is actually, I think it was, around a quarter of what they'd anticipated in terms of the reduction of working hours. So it doesn't necessarily have the desired effects that would, or all of the desired effects that would have been anticipated. So that's really interesting to think about.
So what's the purpose of these trials, Leila? Is it to just get a sense of, what South Africans in the context of our trial that started in March and the one in June, how they feel about it? Or do you want a proper data that can inform a decision that a government, for instance, takes to this effect?
Yeah, so these trials are actually being run by non-profit organizations that exist within civil society spaces. And one of them has run a number of trials. In the one that's being run in South Africa has also been run, in the UK and Ireland, other spaces that we've mentioned in our conversation. And really the idea is to try and see what the appetite is like for it, and if it can actually, work within that space. Again, I'm not intimately involved in it, but what I've actually seen, or involved at all, but what I've seen in the public space is that this is what they're trying to see, right? So the idea of having 80% of the time is so that, well, you're going to have 20% time more to, spend time with your family, to work on wellness, to have work-life balance. Those are the ideas that they want to take out of it. And the idea of the trials is to try and to push employers to say, give this a try and let's see how it works within the workplace. But again, where it's actually coming from is from nonprofits and from civil society. So that's really where the push is coming from. And I guess that research and the results of that can be used in whatever way, and that remains to be seen. We don't really know how that's going to be used or what the outcomes will be at this stage.
Yeah, looking forward to the outcomes of the second part of this trial that started in June. Thank you for making time for us. Leila Musa is a Senior Associate in Employment Law Practice from Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr.